search for evidence. Lawmakers want President Trump to prove he was wiretapped by President Obama. Healthcare overhaul. A congressional report looks at the fallout of the plan to replace Obamacare. Religious persecution.
A lot of people in the world are experiencing religious conflict and want to know how to respond, but they just don't know how.
And 4 years of Pope Francis. We talked to Greg Burke, the director of the Holy See Press Office, about the anniversary and what's next for the Holy Father. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 13th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. New allegations from the White House on possible wiretapping of President Donald Trump during his campaign. Senior White House advisor Kellyanne Conway suggests alleged government surveillance may have gone beyond phone tapping. Her comments come as the House Intelligence Committee asks the administration to provide evidence of the allegation by the end of today. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has the latest on the investigation from the White House. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Kellyanne Conway is also calling on Congress to complete their investigation into the alleged wiretapping before they talk about the issue further. But lawmakers say they still don't have the evidence they need. They've given the Department of Justice until the end of the day to provide the proof of the president's claim.
I'm not in the job of having evidence. That's what investigations are for.
Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, says the White House is pleased with the investigation so far, but the clock is ticking for President Donald Trump to back up his accusations.
For a president to order a domestic wiretap on a political adversary would be obviously an enormous scandal if it were true.
Intelligence surveillance expert Julian Sanchez says there may be something to the president's claims of leaks.
He could raise legitimate questions about whether there are factions within the intelligence community that are illegally leaking information about wiretaps that involve Americans to embarrass him.
Some lawmakers on Capitol Hill, including one outspoken member of Trump's own party, are skeptical evidence exists.
All he has to do is pick up the phone, call the director of the CIA, director of national intelligence, and say, okay, what happened? Because they certainly should know whether the former president of the United States was wiretapping Trump Towers.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer says the administration will wait for the results from the official investigation.
We've made it very clear that we expect the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees to do their job.
Spicer says President Trump was not talking literally or specifically when he accused President Obama of quote-unquote wiretapping his campaign, but he was using the term in a broad sense, meaning surveillance in general. Lauren?
Wyatt, Kellyanne Conway mentioned recent revelations about government surveillance. Can you tell us a little bit more about what she meant by that?
Yes, she was referring to the WikiLeaks release of nearly 8,000 documents that talk about the CIA's tools for breaking into targeted computers, cell phones, even smart TVs. The president, though, we should clarify here, is not claiming that's exactly what happened to him, but his aides are suggesting it's one method that could have been used. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsby at the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. Republicans brace for a soon-to-be-released congressional report on the impact the Republicans' health care plan could have. Many expect the Congressional Budget Office to reveal that fewer Americans will have health coverage under the plan. It comes as a pro-life Catholic leader meets with President Trump today. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has our story. Jason.
Lauren, Speaker Paul Ryan says they expect lower numbers of insured Americans in that report because the GOP plan eliminates Obamacare's requirement that everyone have insurance. The White House press secretary took a preemptive strike against the data, saying it was off by half in its estimates of Obamacare.
We would like to see
President Trump huddles with people hurt by Obamacare.
We were on it for 5 months. Our pediatrician for our children wouldn't take it. My doctor wouldn't take it. So we paid him $8,000 in 5 months and we're never able to use it.
The president says Americans won't see the complete implosion of Obamacare because Republicans will fix it.
And I tell Tom Price and I tell Paul Ryan, I tell every one of them, I say the best thing you can do politically is wait a year because it's going to blow itself off the map. But that's the wrong thing to do for the country.
But Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas tells ABC if Republicans vote for this bill, they're going to put the House majority at risk next year. There's an open question if the House's pro-life language will survive Senate rules. But today, Lewis Brown of a Catholic Healthcare Plan reminds the president it's important taxpayer dollars don't go to fund abortion.
I know from St. John Paul II, he said that all of our human and civil rights that we believe in as Americans, that we share as Americans, the right to health care, the right to medical care, to housing, to all these different things, are illusory if the right to life isn't defended with maximum determination.
Members of the conservative House Freedom Caucus were set to meet at the White House tomorrow to talk about this issue. But because of the big snowstorm setting its sights on D.C., that meeting has been postponed. Member Jim Jordan says either work with us or you don't end up getting the votes. That's the real choice here. Lauren?
Jason, what's happening this week in Congress after the snow and the debate over the Obamacare replacement?
Well, the House Budget Committee is set to debate this bill on Wednesday. That's still on as far as we know. And then from there, if it passes that committee, it will go on to the House Rules Committee and from there to the full House for a vote. Lauren?
Jason Calvi, thank you so much. And joining us now, you saw him there, now you see him here, is Lewis Brown, a director with the Christ Medicus Foundation, who met with President Trump today during that listening session. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
We're not that far from the White House. Was the walk okay?
It was great.
Okay, all right. Well, you didn't have to walk in the snow. We saw what you said to the president. We didn't see his answer. What was the answer?
I think generally he's very supportive of making sure that there are pro-life protections in the American Health Care Act going forward, and that in any event, whatever is passed and signed into law that is securing the Hyde Amendment and prohibiting the public funding of abortion, both he, Vice President Pence, and Dr. Price, the Secretary of HHS, who has a history as a pro-life physician, very supportive of that.
But as Jason said, there is really concern about that pro-life language in the House bill banning tax credits for health plans offering that abortion coverage. They think that it's not going to make it through the Senate. What are your thoughts?
I think there are many different ways of this occurring, and the process is somewhat subjective in the Senate and how those rules work out, how that law is interpreted. But I'm hoping that when it's all said and done, this president is a deal maker. He knows how to make deals, and the right bill will be passed with strong pro-life protections with the Hyde Amendment in it.
Now, this listening session was billed as being about health care.
Right.
You talked about abortion. Did anyone else talk about abortion?
No, I think other folks talked about their experiences under the Affordable Care Act over the last many years, about 7 years since it's been passed. Increased cost, decreased options, all that. Everything that happened with the Affordable Care Act, it's not all negative, but so much of it was. And what I see in Secretary Price and President Trump, Vice President Pence, is an effort to say, we have to improve our American healthcare system, and we have to put the patient-doctor relationship at the center of it, not the government. And that's a good thing.
You referenced a startling statistic today. You said that 17 million African Americans have been aborted since Roe v. Wade came into law. Abortion has the greatest impact on minorities. What needs to happen to change those statistics?
Sure. I think first we have to have a culture of life. And so whether that's in film, that's in entertainment, that's in music, we have to be celebrating life. But we also need to be doing that at the federal and the state level. So here in Congress, when we have laws that witness to the fact that that life begins at conception and goes till natural death, but then also we who are a people of life as Catholics witnessing to the fact that we must have compassion and love and charity for the person who is going through issues with the criminal justice system, who is going through difficult issues.
Mentally ill?
Sure, mentally ill, going through difficult issues on immigration. That constant witness to life at all times, that's the most important thing I think we can do.
Lewis Brown, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. An Egyptian prosecutor orders the release of the ousted President Hosni Mubarak. The move ends nearly 6 years of legal proceedings against him. He was acquitted by the country's top appeals court earlier this month. He was accused of having protesters killed during the 2011 uprising that ended his 29-year rule. And a big day for Pope Francis as he celebrates his 4th anniversary as leader of the Catholic Church. At 7:04 p.m. Rome time, tens of thousands of people in St. Peter's Square witnessed white smoke rise from the Sistine Chapel chimney, signaling the selection of a new pope.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam.
Louis Tarn made the famous announcement, "We have a pope," telling the world Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio had been chosen and had taken the name Francis. About an hour later, the newly elected pope came out to greet the faithful. Pope Francis said the duty of the conclave was to give a bishop to Rome and joked, "It seems that my brother cardinals went almost to the end of the world to get him." He is the first Latin American pope and the first Jesuit to ever hold the office. Greg Burke, the director of the Holy See Press Office, joins us from Rome. Greg, great to see you. Boy, it's been a pontificate of firsts since the moment Francis came out on the balcony. 4 years. How would you describe his impact on the church and on the world, for that matter?
Well, the impact on the church has been huge. The Pope has helped people rediscover the joy of what it means to believe. I think despite anyone's limitations, despite their sins, despite the crosses one might have to carry, there is an inherent joy in the Christian life. Now, in terms of the impact on the world, you know, much of what makes a Christian a better Christian also makes a human being a better human being in terms of taking care of the poor, visiting the lonely or the sick. And I think the Pope has been a huge wake-up call for people in that sense of all faiths, of taking better care of their neighbors.
What are the most significant moments of this pontificate, in your view?
There have been a lot of significant moments. I think that'd be a really long list, but briefly I would say the year of mercy, because it wasn't just that year, it was the whole spirit of mercy, which I think the Pope has helped remind everyone of, that God is waiting there to forgive us, something he said from the first week of his pontificate, and people knew perhaps, but it's been a great reminder. And then a couple of the trips the Pope took where he really wasn't supposed to go. When the typhoon hit that part of the Philippines, he insisted on going. He said, "I'm not going to let those people alone," Tacloban. That was impressive. And also the Central African Republic, a war-torn place. Pope says, "No, it's important that I go there despite the risks," and he did. And then I remember one small moment, but I think it was huge. The impact was huge when the Pope got down on his knees to go to confession himself in front of the cameras. And I think, you know, leading by example, the Pope has done a great service to all of us by doing that.
The Pope's unscripted moments, like his press conferences during his flight, often make headlines. As his spokesman, how do you stay on message?
Well, I think the key thing here is that the Pope's main message is simple, and that remains. It's God loves you, God forgives you. You just have to be willing to ask for that forgiveness and share God's love with the others. You know, learn how to share God's love with the others. So from time to time there will be other headlines, but the main message is that he stays on message for the most part, and every once in a while there are, you know, on the plane trips, other headlines. But the main message is that, and that's what people are getting.
What has been his biggest regret or challenge so far?
Well, I don't think the Pope has been one to say he has a lot of regrets. The Pope says something which is very impressive, which is, "I am a sinner," and I think he says that in every interview he does. You know, that none of us is without fault, and I think that that's been part of his strength, just to show how human he is. Yes, he is the Vicar of Christ, and yet at the same time he's a human being like the rest of us.
Let's talk about you. How has the Holy Father impacted you, Greg Burke?
I think that's a pretty long list, too, in terms of what it's meant for me, but I'll just leave you one small example, and that's that. It's trying to lock on and pay attention to whoever you have in front of you. Quite frankly, you know, most of us are busy with a million things. We're busy with our cell phones. We're talking to people, and yet at the same time we're checking Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and maybe that's what saves the Pope, you know, that he's not there with his cell phone. He has somebody in front of him, and for that moment it's that person, and that person is all that counts. And I think there's a lot to learn from that.
Is the breakneck speed difficult?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people think it's a breakneck papacy, you know, that it's sort of the pace of the Pope, and the Pope certainly does. There are a lot of innovations. But really what has changed is communications, and I think we keep up with it just like everybody else does. Not always easy.
Greg Burke, Director of the Holy See Press Office. Great to see you. Coming up, the plight of religious minorities.
If you want to build societies that are resilient to extremism, you really have to teach them to embrace the freedom of religion or belief for everybody.
And Pope Francis lifts up the symbol of our Christian faith, how we can honor the cross. UNICEF says 2016 was the worst year for children in Syria. The amount of killings jumped 20%, and the recruitment of child soldiers more than doubled in the war-torn country. As refugees flee ISIS-controlled regions, one group is working with teachers in the Middle East to help them educate refugee children about the importance of religious freedom. Joining us now is Tina Ramirez, president of Hardwired, a group training local leaders to defend religious freedoms in their country. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me today.
You have designed a new program which teaches religious freedom as a standalone human right. It's a new way of thinking for many people. How and why are you doing this?
Yeah, well, so Hardwired is the organization that I founded, and the reason that we founded it is because a lot of people in the world are experiencing religious conflict and want to know how to respond, but they just don't know how. And so we provided a way for local leaders to be trained in different methodologies that help them basically learn what freedom of religion or belief is and how they can defend it for themselves and for others to mitigate conflict.
You just returned from Turkey, where you worked with teachers from Iraq and Lebanon and other areas in the Middle East, and you're developing these teaching methods for these kids to learn respect and how to respect religious differences. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it was really exciting. We were able to bring together over a dozen teachers with support from their governments, because these governments are increasingly recognizing that they have an extremism problem on their hands. There's a lot of intolerance that's being fueled by religious conflict in the region.
How so?
And
what are they doing? How does that manifest itself?
Well, for instance, one teacher that we had with us was observing that some students on the playground were playing a game where they were pretending they were ISIS and beheading one another. And as you can imagine, the teachers were shocked and didn't know how to respond. And the normal response would be, well, let's just teach them tolerance or diversity or respect or coexistence. But what we found is that that only gets to part of the problem, that if you want to build societies that are resilient to extremism, you really have to teach them to embrace the freedom of religion or belief for everybody, and change the way that they think about one another.
So I imagine that these teachers have a wide range of emotional and cultural experiences they encounter on a daily basis. Are they really equipped to handle these situations?
No. I mean, most teacher education in the rest of the world is very limited anyway. But on top of that, putting teachers in a situation like in Iraq or Lebanon or many other parts of the world or the Middle East, where they have major refugee influxes or displaced children, where they have, in Iraq, over 3 million children that haven't been educated for the last 2.5 years since the conflict began. And then on top of that, you have children that have been indoctrinated by ISIS and extremist ideology, where over 900 kids at least have been forced to serve as fighters with ISIS. So, but then you see children on the playground that have never lived under ISIS that are responding in a way where they're identifying with the terrorist group. And so teachers have all different levels of students that they're having to deal with now and help them confront the issues that they see around them. The kids can't make sense of themselves. So that's what we're doing, is we're providing these teachers really specific tools to teach about the freedom of religion or belief in a way that helps children begin to think in a different way.
All right. Well, the group is called Hardwired. You're the president, training local leaders to defend religious freedoms. Thank you, Tina Ramirez.
Thank you for having me with you.
Pope Francis says the cross is more than just jewelry. It's a symbol of our Christian faith.
Esprimo la mia vicinanza
The Holy Father says Lent is a time to think about the sacrifice Jesus made for us on the cross. His Angelus address yesterday focused on this weekend's gospel reading where Matthew recounted the scene of the Transfiguration. Up next, children exposed to lust and profanity on television, what parents can do to protect their children from harm. Words of wisdom on this Monday from EWTN's foundress, the late Mother Angelica. She says, if you have a problem in your life that you can't fathom or understand, you have to examine your prayer life, not the problem. A new study finds child and teen television characters increasingly use profanity and sexualized language. The Parents Television Council watched a total of 280 episodes of primetime shows and found most of the offensive dialogue is on family-themed comedies. Tim Winter joins us now. He's the president of the Parents Television Council. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lauren. Pleasure to be with you.
What, from a global point of view, are we seeing an increase or a decrease in this kind of activity?
I think most parents would not be surprised to know that there's an awful lot of sexually explicit dialogue on television. What they would be surprised to see is that it is increasingly being delivered not by the adult characters on the shows, but by the children themselves. The children themselves are uttering the most profane, explicit, and sexualizing dialogue.
All right, let's take a look at some of the numbers. Who had to watch that 280 hours of TV? Was that you?
No, we have a staff of trained analysts who do that.
Okay, good. So here it is. On profanity, it looks like ABC, profanity and sexual dialogue, that ABC was the worst. You have 81 instances of profanity and 42 instances of sexual dialogue. And then there's Fox with 24 and 11, NBC 3, and NBC 0 for sexual dialogue, and CBS only 2 instances over 4 months of sexual dialogue. What are those programs that we're seeing? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, there are a few main culprits in this problem. Most specifically is ABC's show called The Real O'Neills. This is a show that, especially for a Catholic audience, this is about a Catholic family, and it pretty much upends every possible aspect of Catholic faith in a family that you could have, makes jokes of it. But most troubling is that these instances now we're seeing of the sexualized dialogue, the profanity, once every 43 seconds on this show. Every 43 seconds.
On The Real O'Neills?
On The Real O'Neills.
You're seeing purportedly Catholic show.
You're seeing either a profanity, sexual dialogue, sexual innuendo, something very explicit, and most now being offered by the children, not just by the adults.
You do the research, you find out exactly what the numbers are. What kind of impact does this have on children?
Well, there are 2 studies just out in the last couple of weeks talking about how children, when the media they consume does impact their behavior. You have decades worth of science which supports what instinctively parents know to be true, and what people of faith know, that when you pollute your mind with immoral thoughts, what happens in your behavior?
It changes your behavior. You know, when I was a kid, my parents could control the television. I won't say this very loud, but there were 3 main channels. Okay, all right, guilty.
Me too.
Okay, but the teens today, you can watch it anywhere. You can watch it on your phone. You can't really put restrictions on what your kids are watching. I tried to do it, and it's really hard.
It's very difficult in the 21st century. Like you said, it used to be a living room television set and the 3 networks, and now it is hundreds of networks, and then you have your cell phone, you have your iPad, you have your internet connection. And what parents really need to do is take an involved role when you realize that you want your children to grow up to be good citizens. What they're consuming in their media is having an impact on that development, and it has to become a priority for families. You have to be aware of what your children are watching and have time limitations on those devices.
You know what else I find, and we have to go, but I find that just talking to them and having that constant relationship of communication is what really helps. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Tim. Tim Winter, president of the Parents Television Council.
Thank you, Lauren.
Well, that does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for behind-the-scenes looks at News Nightly. We are going to leave you with another look at this day in history, 4 years ago, when Pope Francis was elected. Good night, and God bless.